And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com.
It's time for Indiana basketball. Tickets for mini-series games are now available online at iuhoosiers.com or by calling 866-IU-SPORTS. Mini-series tickets are available in 6-game or 3-game ticket packages as well as individual games, so you'll have plenty of chances to catch the Hoosiers in action at Simon Scott Assembly Hall this season. Grab your tickets online at iuhoosiers.com or get them by phone by calling 866-IU-SPORTS. Go IU!
On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex, Bozich, and I spend some time talking about the exhibition games and what our main takeaways were from the exhibition games. We talk about the turnover improvement, the defensive improvement, and we delve into some individuals like Deron Davis and Jawan Morgan and Al Durham. That is my daughter who is in here hanging out with me while I record this. And then we also spend some time talking about the recruits who are getting ready to sign their national letters of intent, Jerome Hunter, Demezi Anderson, Rob Finnessy, and Jake Forrester, and what IU fans can expect from this foundational class for Archie Miller. All of that and more coming up on this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink. Like most sports fans, you've probably found that buying tickets to sports and concerts too can be a complicated process. But here's the thing. There is a better, simpler way to buy, and that is with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events because with SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can actually buy or even sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. And there is nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will help you get closer to the action for a great value. In fact, SeatGeek helped me get closer to the action last season when I saw Yogi play here in Dallas. I'll probably go see him again this year. And same thing for my wife this offseason. I got her concert tickets as a gift, and she really enjoyed it. And we did it all with SeatGeek because SeatGeek is designed to make the ticket buying experience easier than ever. They save you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find you amazing deals. Now, here is what you should do next, because best of all, Podcast on the Brink listeners actually get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. So there's that little bonus. All you have to do is download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code BRINK today. That's promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Alex, I just want you to know that I am recording this episode of Podcast on the Brink right now under protest because your last messages to me here in Skype are, give me 5 and I'll be ready, going to post film session, Ryan just sent it over. So I'm sitting here wanting to go look at film session, but instead we have to talk because we have this recording scheduled. So as soon as I get done, I'm going and hopping off and reading film session.
I'm sorry about that, Jerod. The show must go on now.
If I sound distracted, that's why. So yeah, but I am really interested to see that because Ryan always does such a great breakdown of all the games, and I can't really remember being as interested in exhibition games as I was for these two. Obviously, because of the coaching change and really wanting to see how the team looked different. And from a macro perspective, I really think that Indiana fulfilled the 3 goals that I had, that I wanted to see as a fan. But number 1, of course, being get out of it healthy and get the guys who entered it injured, get them healthy. And obviously we saw Colin and Al Durham play in the last game. And then, of course, we all wanted to see improvement in turnovers and improvement defensively. And I thought we saw both of those in the exhibition games. Not perfect by any means, but certainly we saw enough growth, I think, to be encouraged that some of the biggest issues that this team faced last year, maybe they won't yet be strengths once we start, playing better competition, but they certainly won't be the debilitating weaknesses that we've seen them be recently. And I think that right there is enough to be encouraged as we exit exhibition season and get ready for the regular season.
I would agree. I mean, the main takeaway for me, at least at this point, has been the turnovers. And these numbers obviously don't count, but as we talked about, I think a little bit last week, this is all we have to go by at this point. And so far it's encouraging just to see the emphasis on taking care of the ball. I mean, Archie was even specific when I asked him a question after the second exhibition game about turnovers. He said, the goal is 10 or fewer a game. So it's nice to kind of just get an idea of what the focus is in terms of that. Obviously, the percentage is something we'll continue to monitor as the season goes along. But I just found it interesting that I went back through all the Ken Pom numbers from last season and also the exhibition games. Even those aren't on Ken Pom, I still track those. And looked at that turnover percentage for all of the games last season. And these first two exhibition games would have been lower than every game last season. So to me, that's notable that at least something has changed here. And I guess it kind of goes along with what you emphasize. And I think right now, Indiana is emphasizing better decision making and doing better taking care of the ball. And so far, they've been able to kind of show improvement in that area. So to me, that was really the main thing. Obviously, we're looking at defense too. It's just really hard to tell against lower level competition. I didn't think Indiana was great defensively against UIndy. I thought they gave up a lot of wide open shots that UIndy just missed, particularly from the perimeter against better teams. Those shots will get knocked down. And
a lot of layups in the first half too. In particular, I thought the defense wasn't as good early in the game.
Exactly. And you don't know what the practice schedule was before, like the days leading up to the game. You don't know how, maybe if guys were tired or fatigued, and it's obviously
by the tornado warning.
Right. Well, I mean, there was a lot going on in that game, but I mean, I looked at the last time also that UIndy came to Bloomington and played. Indiana only beat them, I think, by 13. That was the 2014-15 season, and they won this game a little bit more comfortably. So, like I said, like we talked about last week, we'll quickly forget about all these exhibition games and the Hoosier Stereo scrimmage once we have real games to talk about. But for now, this is all we have, and so this is what we'll break down and try to analyze it and glean anything we can from it.
Let me play devil's advocate with you real quick. I mean, about the turnovers and about the offense, because it has been great to see the turnovers be reduced, and just so many of the mind-numbing turnovers that just make you, kick the table, those are gone, and it's been great to see, and hopefully that continues as the competition gets better. But the offense has also been less explosive. We should be fair. Even though Indiana did turn the ball over a lot in recent memory, those offenses were still pretty good and still pretty prolific despite the turnovers. And we haven't yet seen that. Do you think that is just a function of, this personnel and maybe, not quite the level of shooting on this team and maybe not quite the level of playmaking on this team? Or is this a team that has really focused on reducing the turnovers, doesn't maybe yet understand what is a good shot and not a good shot yet in Archie's system, still getting comfortable, and some of that offense will start to come? Or do you think this is part of what we're going to see, which is a team that takes care of the ball better, but just isn't as explosive offensively?
I think last game, the second exhibition game, the first half, they were a little bit too quick to take shots. I think Archie talked about that in the post game. I think in a lot of cases, a quick shot can be just as bad as a turnover, because if you take a quick shot against a good team that's able to get it out in transition, it's a long rebound. It can turn into a dunk quickly on the other end. I think there's still some habits that this team has from the previous system that need to be broken, and that to me is one of them. Is there was a lot of quick shots in the half court off of one pass, or there wasn't enough ball movement. I think that is something that we'll continue to see improve as the season goes along. But overall, I just think what you said, the personnel on this team, there isn't really a go-to scorer that I can identify at this point. There's guys who are capable of, putting up 15 or 20 points on a given night, but there's not a guy like a James Blackman that you think could maybe go off for 30 if he gets really hot. I mean, it's going to have to be more of a committee approach.
Robert Johnson seems like he's kind of trying those shoes on. Like it seems like his mentality is, I need to go out and get points. And I feel like that's leading him at times to take shots that are a little bit out of character for him. Although I also laud him for really leading the charge at attacking the front of the basket. That was a buzzword Archie used a lot leading into the week, and I thought Robert, for the most part, did a really good job of that against UIndy. So I think, and we kind of talked about this on the post-game show, kind of trying to give, especially guys like him, a bit of a grace period as he gets comfortable in a new system and a new role. I thought his shot selection in the 2 exhibition games left something to be desired, but he's also a guy that we're asking to go from being a complementary player to being a leading scorer, and that transition isn't always going to be smooth, and I think we're going to have to, kind of help him, or not help him, but be patient with him while he figures out, okay, which is a good shot, which is not a good shot, if you're trying to be the go-to scorer.
Yeah, I'd like to see Robert not settle as much. The thing about him is, like, from a physical perspective, like in terms of just the shape that he's in and his body. I mean, that I can't remember, like, since I've been doing this, covering the team, a more impressive guy in terms of physicality. And I'd like to see him kind of try to get to the line more often, get in the lane. There's no reason to settle for contested threes early in the shot clock when you can work the ball around and try to get into the lane and draw fouls. So that's one thing I think it's really important to watch as the season goes along with Robert specifically, is can he figure out a way to take more free throws? I mean, through 2 exhibition games, he's taken 3 free throws in over 50 minutes. If you look at his free throw rate percentages over his first 3 years in Indiana, they've all been in the 20% range. If he can get that number up to...
They haven't even been in the 20% range. They've been under that, yeah.
Right, 30, 35%, maybe 40. I mean, you're talking about that's, 3 or 4 or 5 more points a game that he could be getting. And yeah. I think he's capable of doing it just because he can... he's strong enough to get to the basket, and even if he's not finishing well, he can at least draw some fouls. So I just think this team's going to have to be a little bit more creative in how they figure out ways to score, because I just don't see as many guys who are capable of going off from the perimeter in terms of what we've seen in recent history. The games a couple of years ago against Illinois where they hit something like 19 threes. I just don't see this team being capable of doing something like that.
No. Although certainly having Colin Hartman back is going to help the shooting, because that was great to see.
I think if he would have kept shooting the other night, he might have hit 19. I mean, that was incredible. Like, I mean, he just comes in and less than 2 minutes later, it's like he takes a pretty tough shot and just nails it with confidence and runs back on the other end. It was like he hadn't just been out of action for 19 months.
He's the old man. I got this. Okay, so you said something interesting there, and I want to unpack it a little bit. You talked about Indiana not necessarily having that go-to scorer. And Archie Miller has used this phrase, responsibility for production, and he's talked about, Robert Johnson, Juwan Morgan, Deron Davis kind of being guys who will be relied upon to score. And certainly we saw Devontae Green go off in the first exhibition game. But I want to focus in on Deron Davis for a moment, because, and there's 2 angles I want to take to this. Number one, I thought Deron, to me, had his most impressive performance against the University of Indianapolis that I've seen from him. And it wasn't that he, jumped out of the box score with all these points. I think he had 11 points. But he was really efficient with the opportunities that he got offensively. But more than that, I thought defensively, he played really good defense, had great position without fouling, and was also able to alter shots by getting 5 block shots. And for a guy who hasn't been a very good defensive rebounder, last year he actually had one of the worst defensive rebounding percentages on the team. I thought he really showed an ability and a willingness to block out and get some contested, tough defensive rebounds. And those are a few things that he really needs to do, in addition to just playing through fatigue and playing tired. And he played more minutes than he's ever played, which is 24. And so, you and I think in a private conversation we had, I told you that I was a little bit concerned about Deron, and then I mentioned it on our episode of Assembly Call Radio that just, through the scrimmage in the first exhibition game, I hadn't quite seen the growth in him as a player yet that I was hoping to see. But I was really impressed with what he did in the exhibition game and feel a lot better now about his willingness to take on increased responsibility on both ends of the court. So I'd like to get your reaction to that. And then I also want to talk about the other issue, which is Indiana still is not very good at getting the ball inside, and if they can improve on that, he could be a guy who develops into a go-to scorer because he's so skilled down low, and if he can be on the floor for more minutes and we can get him more shots, we may end up looking back at the season and seeing that he was our most efficient offensive weapon.
Yeah, I think it was encouraging that he played 24 minutes and only picked up 2 fouls. That, to me, is progress. The block shots were good. It wasn't like he was playing a great big man or anything, but it was a bigger guy who had, kind of had a body that could carve out some space. So it kind of would have been easy to leave his feet and get some silly fouls. He didn't really do that. He had 5 blocks. I thought he ran the floor, played pretty hard. Archie made a pretty interesting comment, I thought, post game, just talking about how we need to kind of need to get him to be a guy who can play 25, 30 minutes, which I think is accurate. I mean, you just look at the roster, the guys around him, the depth in the front court. If Duran can only play 20 to 25 minutes, then you're relying on a lot of smaller lineups more frequently, a lot of lineups with Freddie McSwain, who I'm sure we'll get to at some point at the 5. So I think that's one thing he needs to get into better game shape. Archie made that point, which I agree with. In terms of feeding the post, I thought there was a couple of times where they did a pretty good job of kind of just clearing out and dumping the ball down to him. The spacing was relatively good on those possessions. The thing about Duran is he's going to have to, if he does, want to turn into like a go-to guy offensively, he's going to have to become, I think, quicker with his decision making when he does catch the ball in the post, because against better teams, you can't just hold the ball there for a second and then decide what you want to do. You have to catch the ball and then make a play quickly, because if he becomes like a go-to guy, double teams are going to come. He's going to have to be able to react quickly and make a pass out. And if he's going to be given room to operate, he needs to either put the ball on the floor and face up or back a guy down and make a play quickly. You can't just kind of nonchalantly make a move to the basket, which I thought he did a couple of times. But overall, I would say, and spoiler alert here, Jerod, as you I don't know if you're going through film session now, but Ryan looked at a couple of the plays from Duran in this week's film session from the UIndy game. So I think there's some encouraging things from his performance. I think he's gotten better from the first exhibition game to the second one, and I'll be interested to see how he does. I think a week from tomorrow when they go to Seton Hall and play against Angel Delgado, because that's a guy who's a top 20, top 30 big man, or top 20, top 30 player in all of college basketball. And Duran's going to be tested quickly in that game.
I'm not looking at film session. I am 100% focused on this podcast right now.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so you mentioned Freddie McSwain. Let's talk about he and Juwan Morgan together, because I thought it was interesting that we basically got the production from Freddie that we would expect from Juwan. What was it? 12 points and 9 boards, I think, that Freddie had, 6 of them offensive. And then Juwan, only had 2 points. He only had that really nice dunk when he ran the floor really well. And he was much better in the second half. In the first half, he played 9 minutes and I think only registered a rebound and 2 personal fouls. I mean, he was kind of non-existent out there, and he was much more active in the second half, got some rebounds, should have had 2 or 3 assists. But still, he's a guy who hasn't really seemed to be able to get himself going on the offensive end. And while Freddie's performance was great, and I think portends really good things for what he can do this season, we can't rely on him to be a guy who's going 12-9 every time out. Because as was noted on the broadcast, when the athleticism evens out with the opposition, Freddie will still be able to do Freddie McSwain things. We saw it last year. He'll get his offensive rebounds. He'll pick up some garbage points. But he's not going to be a guy that you're relying on to be a double-double threat every game. Frankly, Juwan Morgan is the guy that you need to be relying on to do that. And so I would be more concerned about Juwan if there weren't so many good reports of him in practice. And I think he was the second recipient of the gold jersey. So that shows you that he's, doing the right things in practice. It just hasn't translated to the game. And maybe this is something where we just need to be patient with him as he gets comfortable in the new system. But certainly, I don't think Indiana's going to survive many games with him putting up a 2-6 line. He's a junior now, and more is going to be expected from him. And so I think he's really got to get himself going if Indiana's going to compete in some of their tougher early season matchups.
Yeah, he's actually the main guy I'm going to be watching on Friday, just to kind of see how he plays, because, as you said, I mean, to this point, he hasn't really stood out in any regard, and I think he has to be a guy who really behind Robert Johnson and Deron Davis. Coming into the season, I looked at Juwan as maybe a guy who could be your third or fourth leading scorer, and to this point, I haven't really seen much assertiveness out of him, much of him looking for his offense. I mean, he's a guy who's capable of hitting a three-pointer when he's open. He hasn't really looked for a shot all that much. I think his main thing at this point probably is just kind of figuring out his role in this system. It's obviously a little bit different than what he's accustomed to, and also it's going to be more of an adjustment for him because he's used to being maybe the fourth or fifth option offensively on the court, and now there's going to be lineups where he's the second or third guy. So he's just kind of have to be a little bit more aggressive, come out of his shell a little bit offensively. I think defensively and on the glass, he's still going to be one of IU's most reliable players. And then as far as McSwain goes, I agree with you 100%. I mean, he's not, you cannot expect him to have too many games where he's going to have 12 and 9. I think he's probably best suited in a role where he's playing, 10, no more than 15 minutes a game, giving you energy off the bench. But that's kind of coincides with what I said in terms of it being so important for Deron Davis to be able to play 25 to 30 minutes a game, because if he can't, you're looking at lineups where you've got Juwan Morgan or Freddie McSwain at the 5. And I just, Archie talked, I thought it was interesting that he talked about potentially having some lineups that were smaller to give him maybe an advantage offensively, but how is that going to play defensively against teams with legitimate size? I just don't know how much you can get by with Freddie McSwain at center against a really good team with a good big man.
Yeah. So there's a couple other individuals, Alex, that I want to talk about, and then I know we also have a few things that we want to say about signing day, which is coming up and will be an exciting one for Indiana as 4 players are expected to sign. Before we do that, let's tell everybody about our new sponsor, Hoosier Proud, which we are very, very excited about. And if you haven't visited their website, HoosierProud.com, we encourage you to do so because Hoosier Proud is an Indiana-based T-shirt and apparel company. They are by Hoosiers, and they are for Hoosiers. And there are 3 main reasons that I've been explaining to people in terms of why you should check out their website. And the first one, I mean, this needs to be the most important one for a T-shirt company, is their designs. Because if you don't have cool designs, obviously no one's going to want to buy the T-shirts. And they do have really cool designs. New this year for them, they have officially licensed IU gear, so you can check that out. They also have designs for both Inside the Hall and the Assembly Call on there, so you can check those out, support our shows. And really, the ones that I love the best are just their really cool, interesting, unique, Indiana-inspired designs. And so check all of those out at their website, HoosierProud.com. And the second reason to check them out is their philanthropy. They're really committed to helping out Indiana-based charities, and that is why Hoosier Proud donates a portion of the revenue from their T-shirt sales to specific Indiana-based charities. And on their website, you can see all of the charities they support. And then the number 3 reason to check them out is their generosity. When you go to HoosierProud.com, because you are a Podcast on the Brink listener, they are going to give you 15% off. And that's not just 15% off Inside the Hall shirts or one shirt. It's your entire order. And all you have to do is use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout, and you will get 15% off of your entire order. That is promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K. Check them out at HoosierProud.com. And Alex, we should mention before we move forward, another really fun announcement that you had this week on the site is that Andy Bottoms, his bracketology posts are now going to be on InsideTheHall.com, which you and I are both really, really excited about. Andy obviously has been doing those for a long time. They started over at Midwest Sports Fans. Now he's been doing them at Assembly Call. And I know I'm really excited that they're now going to be on InsideTheHall.com because he's been one of the top 10 bracketologists for years on BracketMatrix.com. And I think putting that content on Inside the Hall will allow it to be seen by more people. Obviously, more Indiana fans will get a chance to see it. He'll get more exposure. And I'm really excited that was able to work out. And so we want to give everyone a heads up that content will be coming on ITH this year.
Absolutely. And in a season this year where it looks like Indiana could be a bubble team potentially. I know Andy's first 2 posts, he's done a quick look at the 16 through 13 seeds in his preseason bracket, and then 12 through 9, and there hasn't been an Indiana appearance yet. And so people are asking in the comments, is Indiana not going to be in his first bracket? It seems that's going to be the case. And so as the season moves along, it'll be interesting to kind of read Andy's insights on where Indiana stands, if they are going to be a team that challenges for an at-large bid. And I know just from reading his projections, I've been using them in my bracket roundups the past couple of years, and people always want to know what Andy thinks. So we're just thrilled and can't thank you and Andy enough for kind of helping facilitate this move over to the site. And we're really excited. Like I said on Twitter yesterday, the quality of our content is really what's most important to us, and so it was just a no-brainer when when we first talked about getting bracketology over on Inside the Hall. So we're thrilled to have it.
Yep. And we'll have to get him on the podcast a few times this year, too, to talk about the bracketology stuff. So, okay, so let's talk about, speaking of Indiana on the bubble, things that need to happen for Indiana to be a bubble team or to be an NCAA tournament team is obviously the development of some young players. And I think the one guy that really caught everyone's attention in the scrimmage in the first exhibition game was Devontae Green. And I think the big question with him, especially for people who remember his, kind of early season performances last year in that televised, BTN scrimmage where he just, dominated in the exhibition games where he played really well is, can he put, back-to-back performances together? Can he do this consistently? And I think the UIndy game kind of showed you, was maybe a reminder that, again, we need to be patient with Devontae. He's not all of a sudden an all Big Ten level guard, right away. Right, he came out, looked for his offense early, got 5 quick points, and then wasn't able to score again. And maybe showed a bit of a lack of focus that night. Missing 3 straight free throws, which is kind of an odd thing, especially for a guy who's a pretty good shooter. And just I think in general, just it didn't find it quite as easy to find all the little gaps and get into the defense and create like he did against Marion, which you would expect because it was a step up in competition. So. Are you concerned at all about what you saw, or is it kind of what you expected? And again, like I said, just a reminder that Devontae Green has a lot of potential, is going to have some big games and is an important part for this team, but he's still a guy who is young, learning the system like everyone else, and that we're just going to have to be patient with as he continues to grow and develop as a player.
Yeah, I mean, you make a lot of great points. I just think the most important thing for Devontae this year is going to be finding that consistency. And what we saw now, we saw 2 pretty good performances in the Hoosier Hysteria scrimmage in the first exhibition game, and then we saw a not so good performance on Sunday afternoon. And can he find that consistency that you would expect him to be able to come up with if he's going to be one of Indiana's top 5 or 6 players? I think that's really the biggest thing for him moving forward. I still thought he did some good things in the exhibition game, maybe not statistically that shows up on the box score, but defensively, I think he's one of Indiana's better perimeter defenders, and for that reason, I think he's going to have a chance to play significant minutes in any given game, even if he's not shooting the ball well or scoring. I just think that he's a guy who can really impact the game on the defensive end, get into the passing lanes, get up on guys and pressure the ball, maybe better than some of the guys he's going to be competing with for minutes, especially like a Curtis Jones, who I still think has a ways to go defensively. But I mean, he's not, he's a sophomore. This is still new for him, like it is everybody else. And sometimes you can get carried away after a good performance or two and think a guy's going to be all of a sudden this All-American / all Big Ten type player. And while I do think Devontae Green's going to be a very positive contributor for Indiana this season, I think he still has a long way to go in terms of being consistent.
One other backcourt guy that is interesting to me, and this is actually an off-season development that I wasn't really expecting, is Aljamae Durham, Indiana's freshman guard. And, look, he's a guy that I think when Tom Crean offered him a scholarship and people saw that he's, kind of a mid 3-star prospect and, this kind of, wiry guard who can get to the basket but can't really shoot. It was kind of one of those, this is going to be an interesting fit in Tom Crean's system. It sounds a little like Stan Robinson, and that, didn't always fit that well. And I think the big question mark for him coming in is, is he going to have a consistent enough jumper to play? And there are people who are even saying, maybe he's a guy who redshirts this year because he may not be ready. But we're saying that of the 3 freshmen, it's possible that he is the closest one to being in the rotation, at least if you, base it off of the minutes that we saw in the second exhibition game. And I don't want to read too much into that because I know Archie kind of scripted the subs in the first half and they were trying to work, Al back in after the injury. But just based on what Archie has said about him, he has been really, really positive about Al, and not just defensively, which we expected. But he's been really positive about his offense, calling him a really good shooter, calling him a really efficient offensive player. And those are not descriptors that I heard about him, in terms of scouting reports, after he committed and signed and was coming into Indiana. So And, we saw him get in there, do some nice things in the exhibition, but he also missed, 4 3-pointers, some of which are pretty good looks. So I'm curious your thoughts on this. Is that you obviously saw him play, and certainly a guy can develop in the offseason, and perhaps his jumper has really gotten more consistent. But it's just been interesting to me how, in a sense, mismatched what Archie has said about him without us really being able to see him play, how mismatched that is with kind of the expectation and the scouting report coming in about him.
Yeah, there's at least a little bit of a disconnect for me because I just haven't seen that outside shot, but also we're looking at it from a perspective of what we last saw of him in high school, and Archie's been the one who's been working with him all off season and into the fall, and so he has a better grasp on it than any of us do. And if he says that he's been shooting it well, then you have to take that for what it is, which is he's been shooting it well under Archie. So I don't. The thing with Al is I've seen him knock down perimeter shots. I watched him last year in the King of the Bluegrass tournament, which is in Louisville. They lost to a really good team from Louisville, but he scored 30 points, made the all-tournament team, and he shot it very well on the perimeter, or from the perimeter of that game. His shot, his form is actually really good. I haven't seen him as a guy coming through the ranks that I would define as a knockdown shooter, but I don't think it's something where he can't make the 3-point shot. I think his biggest strength offensively, though, is getting into the lane and drawing fouls and dumping the ball off. But, I think just based on everything Archie said, that there's a lot of confidence from the coaching staff and Al and what he can bring. And I think defensively, he's going to be terrific. I think he's kind of perfect in terms of what Indiana's looking to do. He's long. He's aggressive defensively. I think he's definitely a guy to watch as the season goes along. And I agree with you right now. He looks, of the 3 freshmen, he looks to be most firmly entrenched in the rotation. So we've only seen one performance out of him so far, but he's another guy I'm really looking forward to see on Friday, just to see if he maybe can knock down a couple 3-pointers if he gets those same looks again.
It also seems like there's something about his attitude and maybe his willingness to be a vocal leader even early as a freshman that Archie likes. Because I feel like if you read between the lines on some of Archie's comments, which is sometimes dangerous to do, but Colin Hartman is a guy obviously that he's been impressed with and knows how important his vocal leadership is. But it still sounds like he wants Robert to do a little bit more, wants Juwan to do a little bit more. But even from some of his comments on Al, it sounds like he's kind of got a bit of that natural leadership. Now, how much that can actually kind of how much you can actually do as a freshman, especially if you're not getting consistent minutes, we'll see. But it just seems like Archie is drawn to him, and look, there's a lot of his attributes as a player are kind of what Archie's guards at Dayton who were successful had, and so I think that's it makes some sense why he would like him. So I've been really, really just excited to see that development, and hopefully that continues because he can be a really important player this year.
Yeah, I think there's also some psychology to how you talk about certain guys based on their situation. From a coaching perspective. With a guy like Robert Johnson, he's a senior, so it's basically, hey, we know you can do it. I may drop subtle hints, or I may say things to challenge you. Whereas with a freshman who's never done it before, in a lot of ways, maybe you're trying to build their confidence up or kind of show them that you're confident in them to help them be more comfortable to do things. So there's also that aspect to it. So
that's a great point.
It's going to be interesting. I think one of the most interesting things as the season gets started here, and there's a ton of games early. I mean, in November, I haven't actually gone through and counted it, but they're gonna be coming quick. All these games, and I'm interested to see how the rotation shakes out, because to me, I can't really differentiate between there's 10 or 11 guys. I don't know who's gonna. I don't necessarily think that Archie's going to want to play 12 guys at Seton Hall. So who are the 7 or 8, 9 guys that he's going to roll with? To me, that's one of the other things that's going to be interesting here as we get going.
Yep. Hey, let me ask you this, and then unless you have any other comments on individual players, we can move on and talk a little bit about the recruits. But kind of my other macro observation after these first few exhibition games. And I don't want this to necessarily come across as an insult to the previous coach, because I think Tom Crean had a lot of strengths. This just may not have been one of them. But I have found myself really, really enjoying the post-game press conferences with Archie. They've been short, they're to the point, and I feel like you really get a lot of interesting analysis, and I feel like he has a really good handle on what kind of happened in the game, and is able and willing to provide candid descriptions of it to the media and the fans. And I'll be curious if you agree, because you're obviously there, and I'm just kind of watching on the video. But I really feel like I get more out of those now than I did before, and it kind of makes it must-watch content. And, and I appreciate it because I think it shows respect for the media. I think it shows respect for the fans. And I think I think there's something about being able to make assessments of players and what happened in a game kind of before you go watch the film. And obviously that's important, and every coach is going to do that. And I'm sure, coaches learn a lot more, from watching the film. But there's something about being able to really understand and pinpoint what happened in the moment that I think maybe suggests also a better willingness to adapt in the moment, and to adjust in the moment. That is important for winning tight games and winning close games in tough environments. So I may be reading way too much into this, but overall, I'm just, as a fan, really enjoying what we get out of Archie Miller media appearances, because I just feel like we get more, and I feel like it's much clearer. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, and maybe it's a little different for Archie too, because he was he played at NC State, played at a high level. He's kind of used to some of the questions that are going to come. Maybe he doesn't, at times, and this is nothing obviously against Tom Crean, but I think at times maybe Tom Crean felt like when questions were being asked, it was more of an attack on him or somebody questioning a decision that he made. And that's with anybody who's, getting asked a question in front of a podium. 35 people are sitting there, wanting to know questions, and maybe it changes a little bit as after a loss. We'll see how he is differently after a loss. But in a lot of ways, I think there's it's just a straightforward, clear-cut approach. I mean, you're not going to get a 2 or 3 minute answer on a question. I mean, I think he goes out of his way to give you what he really thinks in as short and concise of a way as he can. And I think that's really just a change from what we've seen in the past. I'm not saying it's better or it's worse. It's just different. And I think it's for me, who I like to try to finish up my work and make the long drive home and avoid deer on the road. I can appreciate getting the press conferences over and hitting the road once the game ends. So I just think you make a really good point though, that there's not a lot of window dressing. He's just, he answers the question and as straightforward and quickly as possible. I don't think it's a disrespect in terms of, I don't want to answer the question or I don't want to give you more. I just think he tells you kind of what comes to mind and then moves on to the next one. And I think that's just, like I said, different and probably refreshing to some people who maybe had hard time deciphering press conferences in the past.
Any other exhibition game observations before we talk a little bit about these recruits?
No, I think we've hit most of the notable things. I'm just really interested to. It's kind of weird in terms of like how I obviously track the tempo free stats. I'm just really interested to see like these early games, how they do in terms of taking care of the ball and the turnovers and how many points per possession they allow, things like that. Are they going to crash the boards on the offensive glass? Because last game they had a really strong performance on the offensive boards, really led by Freddie McSwain. But in the first exhibition game, we saw them kind of back off going after offensive rebounds. So I'm just really interested to see kind of the style of play and how it evolves over the season. And we've got our first taste of that with the exhibition games, but it's going to be a step up in competition 3 days from now when they play Indiana State. And I think it'll be a good test to open the season.
So national, the signing period is approaching here, and Indiana is expecting 4 players to sign their national letters of intent. And I wanted to cover this real quick because I know the biggest recruiting news for a while now has been what will Romeo do? What will Darius Garland do? And it is unquestionable that if one, or certainly if both of those guys commit to Indiana, it vaults Indiana into the highest stratosphere of recruiting classes. But the reason for that is because of the solid foundation of recruits that are already here. And it's very easy, I think, once you get a recruit committed, and they're ready to go, just as fans, you kind of look to the next guy. And when it's a guy as high profile as Romeo Langford, and then, same with Darius Garland, it's just very easy to focus all the attention there. And so I really want to highlight the 4 guys who are committed, because even if Romeo or Darius Garland don't commit, Indiana already has a really solid recruiting class. And of course, you can include Race Thompson in here too, because he was kind of part of this class. He just happened to reclassify and redshirt. But if you look at the guys, Jerome Hunter, obviously the highest rated of them all, seems to have the highest ceiling as a player. And then you've also got Demezy Anderson from South Bend, Rob Finnessy, point guard from McCutcheon, and then Jake Forrester, a really active, energetic big man from Pennsylvania, I believe. So number one, is my assumption correct? Are all of these guys expected to sign their national letters of intent? And just what are your thoughts now on these 4 guys who, like I said, make up a good recruiting class all their own, whether or not Romeo Langford or Darius Garland decide to come to Indiana?
Yeah, they're all expected to sign. I've been tweeting out some details on their signing day plans over on Twitter today as I received them. A couple of people asked me about Robert Finnessy because I hadn't tweeted anything out of him. I just haven't heard back from him yet, which I'm sure I will at some point today.
I have actually heard from him, and he is expected to sign.
There you go. So he's signing. Yep. So, in terms of this class, I agree with you. It's a good class regardless of whether or not Darius Garland or Romeo Langford are added to it. I think those are really icing on the cake, game changer type of recruits. But this is a foundation that you can really build, I think, a winning Big Ten program on. And all 4 guys bring a little something different. I think we've talked at length about all of them in the past and broken down their games and different things. But the one thing that really stands out about all of them is they all come from winning programs. They all come from winning, high school AAU programs, and I think they're all. None of them really need to be the center of attention. I think they're all going to be good team program guys. I think they're all coming to Indiana for the right reasons because they want to be a part of something that they feel is going to be special as they kind of build it from. Not the ground up, obviously, because there's already a pretty good amount of talent. But this is going to be really the first recruiting class that has Archie Miller, the Archie Miller stamp on it. And so I think all 4 of these guys are excited to be a part of something bigger than themselves. I think they all understand kind of what it's going to mean to put on the Indiana uniform, and those are really the guys who. You don't want to compare it to previous classes, but there's been a lot of guys who have stayed in Bloomington for 3 or 4 years who have been a part of building Big Ten championship teams, and I think the coaching staff thinks this can be the first group that they bring in, and are really excited about being able to kind of build that winning culture and put their own stamp on the program.
It's interesting. This group reminds me a little bit of the Hulls Creek, Watford, Elston group that Tom Creek had, which was really his first big recruiting class. And I know it's really easy, to think about Cody's recruiting class and then obviously Yogi's class because of how high profile they were, and even the Oladipo Sheehy class because, that was so much better than you expected. But, the foundation for those 2 really good teams that Crean had in 12 and 13, were obviously Hulls and Watford and Elston. And, Creek, obviously we know what happened with his career. But this class reminds me of that because these are, the highly recruited guys, really good players. And it's easy in the comparison to the high-level 5-stars like Darius and Romeo to think that maybe these guys aren't on that level. And they aren't maybe quite on that level as prospects, but they really project to be solid, important program guys who can build that foundation, like you said. And if you want that comparison, I think, think about what Watford and what Jordan Hulls and what Derek Elston meant to the program, both as players and productivity, but also just leadership and the culture that they helped build. And I think that's what this class can do for Archie.
Yeah, I mean, and don't sell them short in terms of their talent. I mean, there's 3 guys I think are consensus or close to it, top 100 prospects. There's a 4th guy in Jake Forrester who maybe not as highly ranked, but I think is going to fit perfectly what Indiana's trying to do from a defensive standpoint. They need some size in the post. They need a guy who's athletic, that can rebound, that can block shots, that can run the floor, and he kind of fits that. So I think a lot of times we get too caught up in rankings and where a guy's ranked and, is a guy a 5-star or a 4-star or a 3-star? No, you want to look for a guy who fits the system of what you're trying to implement. And I think with all these guys, they all bring something a little different. Demezy Anderson is obviously a great scorer, shooter. Robert Finney can run a team, to me a leader. He showed me that when he was a sophomore and took McCutcheon to the state championship game. That to me, that was a really impressive thing, and I got a chance to obviously watch him a lot and playing for Indiana Elite. And he's just a guy to me who I look at and I watch him play, and I say, this is a guy who's capable of leading a winning basketball team. Jerome Hunter is, to me, the most talented of the four and has a tremendous upside. I think he's got a chance to be an NBA player down the line, and obviously talked a little bit about Forrester. I just think he's going to be, I don't want to call him a glue guy because I think he's capable of being more than that, but I do think he's going to do a lot of the little things that contribute to winning. So I think fans should be really excited about this group. I mean, it's going to be to me a top 10, 15 class, regardless of who rounds it out here. Obviously, if Romeo and Darius come on board, you're looking probably a top 2 or 3 class nationally. But this is really a solid class right as it stands right now with three top 100 guys, 4 guys who I think are really going to be impactful in terms of winning with the program.
Man, this is always a good time of year. 5 takeaways is back, film session is back, post game shows are back, and I have to say I'm feeling more excited this season than I felt in a little while. And I think it's the freshness, the new coach, the new approach. I'm really excited to see what this team can do. Definitely preparing myself to be patient because, I did a game-by-game picks podcast with Galen over at Crimson Cast, and it's hard. You look at some of the potential stumbling blocks early in the season, and it's hard to think that this team will be quite ready for those challenges early. But I really think both with, the expectation of how the guys will grow in the system, some of the young talent that could really grow and emerge, and how I think the schedule opens up a little bit, especially in February. I really think there's the potential for this team, even if they do start out slow, to really pick up some steam and not only build a really good NCAA tournament resume by February and March, but just frankly be a team that no one wants to play. And if Indiana controls the ball, like they did in the exhibition season, and obviously increases the offensive efficiency along with it, and plays the kind of tough defense that Archie wants to play, I just think this is going to be a team, even if they don't get quite as many wins as we would all want, is going to be really fun to watch and see develop. And that, I think, above anything else, that's what has me really optimistic heading into this season as a fan.
Yeah, and the weirdness of the schedule, I think, is going to be a storyline as we move into early December, having those 2 Big Ten games, and it's going to be a little bit more crucial than ever to be ready to kind of play at a higher level than what you'd expect in early December, having 2 games that really mean something. I'm not saying that these other non-conference games don't mean something, but these are Big Ten games that you're not used to seeing till early January, a month earlier than usual. And then obviously the non-conference schedule is just brutal in terms of playing 4 top 20, top 25 teams. I think Indiana, if they can win one or 2 of those games, they've done really well for themselves. And I think also bumping up the level of competition in some of the other quote unquote guarantee games is also going to pay dividends for this team, because they're going to be challenged early in some games that maybe where you don't think, the team, the opponent's very good on paper. And then you actually watch the game and say, well, this team's not really, they're, Ken Palm 150, 200. That's really not that bad of a team. It's going to be a little bit different. They're going to actually have to play pretty well to win these games. And I think ultimately that's kind of how you build a team that's going to be better by the end of the season. And like you said, I think the goal here is there's going to be some lumps taken early, but the goal is to be playing your best basketball by the end of the season. Maybe this is a team that can go on a run later in February, win a couple of Big Ten tournament games, and get an NCAA tournament bid. I think that's really kind of the goal as you go into the season. But I think it's going to be fun, exciting, something different. I'm really excited to just kind of see how this group develops over the course of the year.
Yep, and it all starts on Friday, so join us on the Assembly Call for the post-game show after, and of course go to Inside the Hall and get all the content that comes there the minute after, 5 takeaways, the press conference video, and then obviously Andy's bracketology as we go through the season and track where the Hoosiers are. It is going to be a fun one, and we also look forward to kind of helping guide you through it here weekly on Podcast on the Brink as well. So thank you for joining us for this week's episode, and we will talk to you next week.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.